What's up Age fans, this is Age Vampires Tips and welcome back to a new tutorial video. So recently I did a video on the Minoan civilization and how it's a very good water civilization. In this video I actually want to show you a special strategy that you can only do with the Minoan civilization on a map where your initial town center is located near a body of water. Basically this strategy exploits the fact that the Minoan fishing boat only costs 35 wood. This strategy is actually quite uncommon and you won't be able to do this very often, but if you are able to do it correctly, this can make for some spectacular games and it's very fun as well. I call this strategy the Minoan Dockstart, and with this strategy you do not look for your berries. In fact, you do not look for any food. Instead, you will start to go for the nearest forest, drop down a storage pit, collect wood and try to make at least 2 docks as quickly as possible. And this will actually work surprisingly well with the Minoans because of their cheaper fishing boats. Now you may be thinking to yourself like, what the hell, how can this be good? If I'm collecting wood, I can't make any villagers. And that is entirely true. If you're going for this strategy, you will be behind on villager count compared to the rest of the players. But that's actually entirely fine. In fact, it's just perfect because it might just trick your opponent into thinking that you're either a very bad player that doesn't know how to play, or you have a very bad spot or start or whatsoever. Now, while initially you will be behind on villager count, you will be able to catch up around the 6 or 7 minute mark. In fact, by the time you've reached the 8-minute mark, you will probably be at least 5 villagers ahead on all the other players. So it can be a very good strategy, it's also very entertaining and has the element of surprise. So let's see what it's all about by looking at an example. Now first off, it is worth noting that this is a very opportunistic strategy, meaning that you won't go into the game thinking, okay, so now I'm going to do a dock start. No, because this strategy only works under very specific conditions. The first condition is that you need to have the Minoan civilization. The second condition is that your forest needs to be close to your town center. And it needs to be a good forest as well. The third condition is that you need to be next to a large body of water that contains plenty of fish. This strategy is highly dependent on these factors. For instance, if you made a dock but there's no fish nearby, this strategy is going to fail miserably. And if you can't find a decent forest within 20 seconds, you might as well give up on this strategy and just simply go for berries or fish. Now in this situation I do have a nice forest quite close to my town center, and I also have some water with a good amount of fish. So in this case it's a good idea to do a dock start. You want to get your storage pit up and running as quickly as possible, and then you want to proceed to collect wood with 5 villagers. Now the other 2 villagers will go to the shore and these 2 villagers will be used to make your first dock. While you are waiting for the first 100 wood to collect, you do want to get some fish with these villagers. You'd never want them to be idle. And that extra 20 food will help you to get your first villager out sooner. Efficiency and micromanagement are very important in this strategy. As soon as you've collected 100 wood, you want to make your first dock in a position where it is quite close to a couple patches of fish. Meanwhile, you do want to watch your woodcutters to make sure that they're cutting in the most efficient way possible. Once the first dock is ready, queue your first fishing boat and then make sure that your 2 builders do return to your storage pit or town center with 20 food. At this point you will be 3 or 4 villages behind on other players, but that's perfectly fine as I already said. Now as soon as you're able to, you should make your second dock. It's fine to just make your second dock with 1 villager instead. Don't forget to keep making fishing boats with your first dock. Also, initially it can be a good idea to drop off food manually with your fishing boats in order to make that 8th villager just a little bit faster. At this point of the game, you will still be 3 to 4 behind in population count compared to all the other players. But that is about to change. Also, around this time you do want to have your 8th villager out. My villager production isn't very steady yet, but just watch that population counter as it's about to go through the roof. And because your population is going to rise quite sharply from this point, it is extremely important to make houses in time so you don't get housed. You should keep up manual food droppings with your fishing boats until you have a steady villager production from the town center. Once your second dock is ready, make sure that the villager that built it returns to your town center with 10 food from fish. If it's possible, of course. If you can help it, it's never a good idea to let your villager return to your town center with empty hands. One thing you won't ever see me do during this strategy is explore, even though I always tell you how important exploration is. This is the only strategy where you don't need to explore and you don't really want to either. You will be able to get more than enough food just from fishing in order to easily get to the Bronze Age. So you won't need to really explore for food, unless you haven't found your berries yet, because you still need to make a granary. The only time you want to explore a bit later on is in order to find a gold mine if you haven't found one already. But other than that, because you are behind on villagers, you do need all the villagers you have on wood in order to sustain your fishing boat boom. And you cannot afford to use any villagers in order to explore the map. One thing you should be aware of here is the way I am building my houses around my woodcutters. This creates a barrier and gives me a little bit of extra time if I am being tool rushed. This strategy is quite vulnerable to tool rushing, so it is important that you do this. Now, I'm not going to lie, this strategy doesn't come without risks, especially if you are a wing player, but if you are able to pull it off correctly, you will be able to get to the Bronze Age relatively quickly with 1,000 food stockpiled and at least a population of 50. And we will see this happening in the next couple of minutes. And we've now reached the point where your population count will probably be higher than all of the other players in the game. And they will be like, what's happening here? This guy was 5 villagers behind me 2 minutes ago and now he's suddenly ahead? What the fuck? And my population count is now at 28 villagers around a 7-minute mark. And that's actually pretty impressive. When you're ready, you do want to make a third dock to further improve your economy. Keep in mind that when you're doing this strategy, you will be behind on real villagers compared to the other players. And because of this, you will be making villagers for a longer time than you're used to. And this is also what makes this strategy quite vulnerable to rushing. The combination of a late tool time and a comparatively low villager count aren't exactly a recipe for success when you're under an early tool rush. That's why you should always build a house barrier if you are using this strategy. If your villagers are relatively safe, the tremendous amount of food income from your fishing boats will allow you to easily do a 3 barracks X-Men pump. So defending yourself in case of a rush is definitely a great option. So it's not all bad, but you do want to be very careful, especially if you are a wing player. If you are in the pocket position, you can be a little more reckless, as you're less likely to be rushed. And at this point I have 19 real villagers. I could make one additional villager, but I decided to age up instead. If you are in the pocket position, you can afford to make 1 or 2 additional villagers. Now once you've clicked the tool age upgrade, you do want to make a granary. It's quite easy to forget this, but you really need a granary. Not because we are going to get the food, but you do need a granary to make a market in order to upgrade to the Bronze Age. So don't forget this, it's important. One thing that's extremely important in this strategy in particular is to make new storage pits often in order to sustain a solid wood income. This is extremely important because the speed of your fishing boat boom depends entirely on your wood income. Once the granary has been finished, don't use that villager to collect food from the berries, but instead reassign it to collect wood. Apart from your granary, don't forget to make a barracks as well. Also make sure that your fishing boats are fishing efficiently and aren't in each other's way, because this will halt your food income. Notice how incredibly fast I am collecting food right now. As soon as you reach the tool age, drop down the market, drop down an archery range, At the same time, queue one villager at the town center, while your villagers are building those buildings. And once all that is done, just upgrade to the Bronze Age as soon as possible. The great thing about this strategy is the amount of food you get. Despite the fact that I've just upgraded to the Bronze Age, I have already collected 300 food. And if you are in the pocket position, this allows you to easily do a 3 town center boom right after you've hit the Bronze Age. However, if you are a wing player, you will never use up all this food because you do want to go for a composite bowman army instead of making additional town centers. In this case, the best thing to do is to give 400 to 500 food to your ally. This will give them a tremendous boost against their opponent, while it doesn't really hurt you because you don't really have a use for that food anyway. By this time, you should also start to mine gold, especially as a wing player, because you want to have those composite bowmen out as quickly as possible. You also want to make a 4th dock, because the fish at your existing docks will run out pretty quickly here. And also look at my population count. At the moment I have a population of 50, which is quite nice, but not unusual when you're doing this strategy. Keep in mind that more than 50% of your economy is located on the sea in the form of fishing boats. And this is also a weakness that can be exploited if your opponent decides to attack you early on in the sea. And that's why you also need to make some scout ships in order to defend your fishing boats. Fortunately, Minoan is the perfect civilization for this with their ship discount. Look at me, just hitting the Bronze Age with 1,000 food stockpiled. This is an incredible amount of food, and you can easily give 500 or even 600 food to your ally at this point, and you will still be fine. And that's why I like this strategy so much. I mean, what strategy allows you to casually give 600 food to your ally in the very early Bronze Age? Also at this point, make sure to research wheel, improve bowmen, and upgrade your fishing boats to fishing ships, as well as upgrade your scout ships to war galleys. One thing I didn't show you here, but you should really do in a real game, is research small wall and wall in your woodcutters while you are upgrading to the Bronze Age. As soon as you've researched improved bowmen, make sure to upgrade them to composite bowmen and start producing improved bowmen while you are upgrading to composite bowmen. You can also make some camels or cavalry to fend off early rushes while you are getting your composite bowmen out. Anyway guys, that's pretty much the end of this strategy guide. I think it's a very fun strategy, and it is actually my favorite strategy, despite the fact that I don't get to do it very often because it requires you to be the Minoan civilization and it requires you to have a very specific map type. I really hope you found this tutorial video useful. If you did, make sure to like the video, subscribe to stay updated on future videos, and until next time, take it easy.